All right. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing very well, Rabbi. I just got out of a chat with nice three ladies up there at Congregation B'nai Israel in Gainesville.
Ah,
What I'm trying to do, according to the T-shirt, and if you look behind me, that's Silver Springs.
right.
What I'm trying to do is plan a trip on a Friday to Silver Springs, and then just schlep on up to Gainesville for services.
Got it.
All right, not a bad idea, because that way I get to what I want to do is get with the staff up there at Silver Spring State Park, and hopefully, or with this handy dandy little camera, take some pictures of the trails they have up there, and they have a lot of trails, and give them some feedback. But I did talk to let me get the email address a minute. Email stuff. Wait a minute. Get the name right. Cassidy Odie, I believe her name. She's a program director up there at B'nai Israel.
Okay, I don't think I've met.
And I gave the link to TI of Florida here because I told them that we're doing both virtual and in attendance, and they're going to be going to it here maybe in a month or so.
Got it.
Because that means they had the congregation, the sanctuary is a good size. It's a very good size. It's one of those where you get the sanctuary on one place, and then right next door you pull the partitions back. You got the typical design.
Yeah.
Okay, I've been there a couple of times up there, and I said, well, what I'm thinking is in the realm of Tikkun Olam to maybe they might want to help out in freeing the Akawaha and the springs up there and all that good stuff, because it's right in their backyard.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking right now is something like that. So it was a good set. It was a very good chat sessions, a coffee session they call it up there. But I said to contact Temple Israel on what they're doing, the details on physical attending and virtual and all that. Because I noticed they got Shul Cloud too as well. I said, well, okay, that's great, but the exact details of how we're doing a physical attending on Shabbat services, maybe they'll contact you and ask you.
Happy to talk to them about it.
Yeah, that'd be good. I mean, they're a nice congregation, nice to visit there and all that. But like I said, they're 100% virtual.
Well, for some congregations, that seems to be the best. But I'd be happy to talk to them about the ins and outs of how we're managing for ourselves. Is everyone else doing well?
Huh?
I was asking if everyone else was doing well, all the other attendees.
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Looks like people are doing fine, or at least not giving any indications that they're not. So we are now in our second second parasha of the book of Exodus, Vaera, and we are now beginning the true showdown. Yes, we had the appointment of Moses to his mission, but now he is really getting into the nitty-gritty. And everybody focuses on the plagues, and indeed they are rather spectacular and critical. But before the plague happens, we actually get the original sign that Moses was told to give. And that is the sign regarding his staff, the rod, that is going to be thrown down in front of Pharaoh and will turn into some form of serpent. Tanin is not exactly the same word as nachash, which is usually the word that's used for snake. It could have been some other reptile. Some people have considered it perhaps to be a crocodile in keeping with the theme of the Nile. But we're going to just go ahead and call it a serpent because our translation calls it serpent, and we can't really say that it's not a serpent. So we'll stick with that metaphor. Really, everything we're going to talk about today works regardless of what animal shape it could be taking at this moment. Okay, so let's get our text underway, and we'll see what happens during this confrontation, or as I pointed out in our and the reminder to the WhatsApp, the staff meeting. Wah, wah. All right, I need the rim shot out. When Pharaoh speaks to you and says, "Produce your marvel," you shall say to Aaron, "Take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. It shall turn into a serpent." So we see right away that there is already an expectation that within the Egyptian court, if you want to make your case, you have to produce some kind of miracle. You claim you're talking for God. Don't give me justice. Don't give me compassion. Don't give me wisdom. Give me magic tricks. That apparently was just the way that the Egyptians viewed divine, that a person had been divinely appointed. Doesn't mean that that's the way Judaism does. In fact, later on, while we still do look for certain types of impressive deeds of prediction from prophets, the fact that people are able to produce miracles doesn't convince us of the rightness of their cause, and if the other aspects of their cause are not righteous. So Pharaoh is going to say, "Produce your marvel," have Aaron throw it down, and then it'll be a serpent. All right, so we got the set stage. We see what's about to happen. Verse 10, it happens. So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Lord had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. All right, it does what it says on the tin. God told them to do this, and they did this. So we have the serpent being turned. Again, very famous. It's lots of screen time in movies. People love the idea of it turning into a snake, and here we see it. Verse 11, then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise men and the sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians. In turn, did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. All right, so here we get a major theological question that we'll have to wrestle with our commentaries, which is, it looks like the magicians are doing the same thing. Right? It looks like they are also turning their rods into serpents. That seems problematic. However, the second half of verse 12 does point out that Aaron's rod swallowed their rod, so that seems like a one-upsmanship for our team. However, despite all of this, we can see in verse 13, yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. And then by verse 15 on, we are going to move in to the idea of creating the Nile as our into blood. And that is going to be what unfolds next. All right, so like I said, this is a small little episode. It doesn't get as much attention as the actual plagues do, but there are some very interesting and important elements. The first, of course, is the use of miracles to try and establish one's claim. Second is the participation of the wise people in doing things that parallel what Aaron did, which of course undermines his claim. And then the third, the idea that there was one-upsmanship by Aaron nonetheless, and that his rod was able to do something theirs couldn't, namely devour them. And then finally, of course, that Pharaoh continues to be obstinate and refusing to let the people of Israel leave. So we're not going to get into too much of the idea of not using miracles to prove your point. That's something we've covered a number of other times in both classes and sermons. But are there other questions or observations you would like to make on this part of the Torah text before we jump into our commentaries? All right, then let's jump into our commentaries. Zoom in a little bit for the benefit of the small screen folk. All right, so the first thing that we find is that Aaron's staff swallowed. I've underlined staff because that's what Rashi is going to make as his point. After it had again become a staff, it swallowed all of them. Right? Rabbi Eliezer from the Talmud is where Rashi gets this. Right? He says this was a miracle within a miracle. It was Aaron's staff, not his serpent, that swallowed the other staffs. We go back to our text just so you can see what they're focusing on. You can see that in verse 12, it says very clearly that Aaron's mateh, his rod, swallowed their matotam, right? Their rods. So the word doesn't say his tanim swallowed their tanim. It says his staff swallowed their staff. And the Talmud is saying that is a miracle upon a miracle. You know, it's one thing to turn something into a staff. It is another thing to turn a staff into a snake. It's another thing to have your stick swallow someone else's sticks. So how do we understand this, right? Well, Sifrei Chachamim points it out in more detail for us. Right? After it became a rod, again did it swallow all the rest, since it is not written that Aaron's serpent swallowed. We infer that it became a rod. If it were still a serpent when it swallowed the others, it would be only one miracle. But this occurred after they all became rods again, as it is also written, Aaron's rods swallowed their rods. So it was a double miracle. And indeed, by picking up on this, Sforno was pointing out that this is also showing us the difference between what the sorcerers did and what Aaron did. We might have thought the difference would simply be that one creature swallowing the other creature shows the creature of God as being supreme. But as we're going to see, the fact that it was a rod swallowing a rod is what is giving us the greater position for God. This would demonstrate that only God in heaven can grant life to inert phenomena, something Pharaoh sorcerers were unable to do. Right? It's one thing to, like I said, have a snake swallow a snake, but to have an inert rod, just a piece of wood that when touched against another wood would absorb it, that's a miracle. An animal eating an animal, that's called everyday life. A piece of wood eating another piece of wood, that is something altogether different. And that is something that would be setting Aaron apart from the other magicians, and of course, thus God apart from the Egyptian deities.
Rabbi, quick
Yes.
question. Was that the same staff that blossomed in the desert, or was it a different
Yes.
one?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep, it's multi-purpose. So Sforno goes on to remind, or not to remind us, but to point out that even what you might have thought was happening with the magician staff was mainly not what you thought they were, right? They looked and felt like these kinds of monsters, the Tanim. They were not able to move like these monsters move, or even not at all. So he's arguing that the staves that turned into the serpents were just sort of pretend. I don't know if you've ever been to a magic show where they have those wands that when you push a button collapse, right? Suddenly you could make it look like it was a snake. His argument is they did no magic, that all they did was make their rods look like a serpent, but it didn't act like a serpent. And indeed, only God can give true life to the inanimate. This is something we say all the time when we say Mechaye Metim, that God is the one who gives life to the dead. Remember, dead does not only mean deceased, dead just means not having life in it. God took dirt and made life. God can take a stick and make life. God can do these things. The Egyptian gods and their magicians cannot. Everyone following the logic up to this point? Has everyone updated their mental image of the staff fight to be wood versus wood rather than snake versus snake?
I never could have imagined that, but now that you're saying that, and especially the giving of life, I mean, that makes perfect sense.
Well,
It- Go ahead, John.
when I think of this spatially, there's, a dozen guys show up for a throwdown with their staffs. Walking out of there is only one dude with a staff.
Yes, the images are quite powerful when you realize, like you say, the overall staging of everything that's happening here. He is really upstaging them in front of Pharaoh, and yet Pharaoh remains unmoved. A topic we're going to have to come back to by the time we get to the end of this. We can certainly see why he might have been unmoved. If it had just been one snake eating another snake, that's not so impressive. On the other hand, if it's a stick eating a bunch of sticks, don't you think he would have moved? Like I said, hold that in your mind, and we'll come back to that before we're done. Let's move down to our next section here. So the Torah refrained from saying they actually became snakes. This is Rabbeinu Bachya, and it's a much longer text. You're welcome to look it up in more detail, because he's arguing that the Torah was not saying they actually became snakes. The sorcerers did not have the power to do that. They could only create the illusion, not the real thing. What the sorcerers did was merely sleight of hand, right? What you might call like a modern stage magician, right? When they make the card disappear from their hand, they're not actually making the card disappear. They're just making you see the card no longer there. Seeing that the wording lent itself to two different interpretations, the Torah had to write immediately that Aaron's staff swallowed all the staffs of the sorcerers in order to show the qualitative difference between what Aaron had done and what the Egyptians had been able to do. In the longer part of his commentary, he is arguing that although the same wording is used, the same verb and prepositions are used for the creation of the serpents, that we should read Aaron's creation as being legit and read the sorcerer's creation as being fake. And he's arguing that the way we know that even though the verbs and prepositions are the same, we know that one was real and one wasn't, is because of what they do. With Aaron's staff swallowing their staffs, that shows the difference between what Aaron had done and what they were able to do. The fact that Torah describes their staves as being swallowed instead of their snakes being swallowed shows that their staves had remained staves in spite of appearing to be snakes. So he's bringing another justification for the idea of it's stick versus stick, because it doesn't say that Aaron's staff swallowed their snakes, because their staves never became snakes, right? Their rods never actually turned into a snake. They just looked like that, according to this line of interpretation. Another proof that the sorcerers only created an illusion is that the Torah does not describe them as having performed their art in the presence of Pharaoh and his servants, as the Torah had been at pains to emphasize concerning Moses' miracle. I'm just going to flip back to the other page so I can draw your attention to that. If you look at the top here, where it says that you're going to do this, it says that it will be done lifnei paro, right, in front of Pharaoh. And indeed, when it actually happens, it is lifnei paro and lifnei avadav, right? It's doubling up on the in front of aspect, meaning this was really done quite explicitly in the eyes of both Pharaoh and the servants. But when we see the action of the sorcerers, we do not see them actually saying in front of. It says they did likewise, right? Now, does likewise means they actually copied precisely and also did it in front, or does it mean they, said, oh yes, we can do that here, and step behind the pillar and then drop down the snake? That seems to be implying, says Rabbeinu Bachya, that they did not do theirs on stage. And indeed, there are different types of even modern stage magicians. There are those who will only perform on stage, and there are those who do what's called close-up magic, where you can literally look at exactly what they're doing within hand's reach. And it's more impressive because they are still fooling your eyes, even when you can see it that closely. However, as there is still a body of opinion that says that what the wizards did was indeed magical, he does want to offer a line of thinking on that possibility. Alternatively, supposing that the magicians had really been capable of turning their staves into snake, as the Talmud in Hulin 7 suggests, why then were they called just sorcerers instead of prophets? Right? I mean, after all, if they could do it, right, there are two ways to look at their being able to do it. Either it demotes Aaron, or it would promote them up into a higher status. Rather than just being mere charlatans, they become somebody with power. Why would it be that even if they had done this, even if they really had made a snake with their stick, why would we not give them greater status? The answer is that they denied the power of the celestial forces, meaning they deny God. Their staves did indeed turn into live snakes, but the qualitative edge of Moses' staff was simply that it swallowed the staves of the sorcerers. So because their staves, even if they turned into snakes, were brought about by a more mundane magic, rather than something that was derived truly from God, we shouldn't then be surprised that their staves got swallowed up. So either way you cut it, whether they were doing real magic and had real snakes, or whether they were just doing illusions and just sticks, either way it is the swallowing by Aaron's staff of theirs that shows that there is something fundamentally different happening here. This whole incident between Aaron and the sorcerers and Moses and Pharaoh was not a failure, as it is often portrayed. This was not where God did not come out on top, or did not make something that was an obvious and startling proof of God's power and God's appointment of Moses and Aaron. Instead, it truly was quite earth-shattering, and it's unfortunate that it did not have more of the desired effect. One little thing I just want to throw in, which is that when the discussion began, excuse me, back to our Hebrew, right? I started it just a little bit down, but I wanted to point out, just a second, right, that at this point that, there we are, sorry. At the beginning of chapter 7, verse 1, we see that God is placing Moses and Aaron in very particular roles, right? See, I place you, Moses, in the role of God to Pharaoh, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. This doesn't necessarily mean he's becoming God. It just means that obviously God is not going to talk directly to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is not able to have that level of spiritual understanding. So instead, Moses is acting as a God substitute, and Aaron, therefore, is acting as a prophet. Because as you can see, it is going to happen where Moses tells Aaron what to do, right? You shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. Rather than having it be Aaron just doing it on his own, or even Moses doing it on his own, by having a hierarchy here of Moses being a person who can command a person who can do this miracle, it is elevating Moses into a higher position than Pharaoh. Because when Pharaoh tries to command his people to do that, which would make them equal, as we saw, they cannot match it fully. Yes, they can do it superficially, but because of the ultimate swallowing, it means that Pharaoh is below the status of Moses. And if Moses is above the status of Pharaoh, then all the more so God, who is above Moses, is over Pharaoh, and thus has the right to legitimately command him to let the Israelites go. You guys following the staging here? I know in the United States, we don't always worry about status so much. We actually do. We just pretend like we don't. But who gets to sit where? Who gets to speak first? Who gets the last word in a meeting, at a banquet, at any kind of ceremony? Those are things that are very, very substantial. And by deliberately having an underling to Moses, it is creating a stronger position for Moses than if Moses had done it himself. All right. Well, we'll leave that that social climbing aside. Yes, John.
Well, Rabbi, that goes into what I said when I think of it spatially. You've got Moses and his crew of one, who's got his stick. Pharaoh and his crew of however many, they all got their sticks. And they're all there together for this, as I said, a throwdown, where only one of the crews comes out of this ahead, and he leaves with one stick. They all have no sticks.
Correct. However, they also leave empty-handed
Would
in the sense that they didn't get what they wanted, which was the release of the slaves.
But
Rabbi,
no, but they were told in advance. They were told in advance that Pharaoh will not hearken to you.
So then we're going to have to eventually come back to why didn't he? I mean, this is a pretty impressive feat. Why would he not have hearkened to this? But we'll come back to that by the end.
Rabbi, wouldn't that also represent the fact that, you know, the Moses, Aaron's staff was the one who actually ate the other ones? Didn't that represent also authority? Or is it that something that is just totally different?
Absolutely. And indeed, even, we don't know everything about ancient Egyptian culture, but from what we have learned from hieroglyphs and from historical records is that the staff of the snake staff was a scepter that was held by the pharaoh. It was a symbol of authority, particularly of the upper Nile area. So to have a snake staff eat the snake staff of Pharaoh's folks was absolutely a symbolic act, very, very specifically, of the one-upsmanship. Rather than having his staff turn into a bird or have his staff turn into a lion, having it turn into a snake was precisely because that was the symbol of authority, or one of the symbols of authority in ancient Egypt. So yes, as driving it home as possible that God was more powerful and had more authority than Pharaoh. However, there is a bit of a question brought up in the Midrash of whether this was the right kind of miracle to bring. Right? Is this really what you would want to bring as your way of proving your point? So Yohani and Mamre, this in the Midrash were the presumed names of the wizards that were doing their magic on behalf of Pharaoh. They said to Moses, "You have brought grain to Afreim." Now, this becomes my new favorite aphorism. Right? You have brought grain to Afreim is basically the equivalent of bringing coals to Newcastle. It's basically like saying, whoa, you're bringing magic to Egypt? You're going to bring magic to Egypt. We are the home of magic, right? What do you think you're going to impress us with your magic? We got magic. It's like, what are you going to do? Card tricks on the streets of Las Vegas? There are 100 magicians, pouring out of every window. That's not the place to show off your magic. However, Moses responds with a great takedown. To the city of vegetables, take vegetables, which means in context that basically if you want to impress someone, beat them at their own specialty. So yeah, I brought magic because my magic, in quote, which comes from God, is greater than your parlor tricks. And I'm going to bring something that you will recognize far exceeds your own capabilities. If I did it in a different field, the field of arms or something like that, that would not be as impressive to you because you would simply say, well, that's not our specialty. But to beat you on your own turf, to beat you on your own terms, to beat you in your own mechanical way of what you normally use to prove your authority, and to show that I can outshine you in that, yeah, coal's the Newcastle, but my coal is a diamond and your coal is just a rock. So yeah, it's a great little bit of trash talking. And the staff of Aaron swallowed their staff.
Joshua,
Yes.
this is working. There's also a political aspect to this. Can you hear me?
We got you, yes.
Okay. The political aspect of it is, as you said, with the staff, with the snake on it. I mean, we still have that in the monarchy of the crowning of Queen Elizabeth, that concept of a staff. But on the crown of Pharaoh was also a snake,
Yes, on the
was
crown
the
of the
cobra.
Pharaoh's crown. Yes.
So by using that visual in this instance, he's showing that politically he is higher than the Pharaoh. I mean, it is a threat to his reign. As I mean, I can see it from a purely political standpoint too.
If
That's
you are
all.
you are picking a symbol, I mean, it's the equivalent of walking into the White House and having your bald eagle eat the president's bald eagle, right? It's not just a random animal, but these are very much politically chosen symbols for like you said, the supremacy over Pharaoh and an implied threat, which is I can eat your country, I can eat your pharaohship, I can eat you, Pharaoh. Understand that that's what's being symbolized in all of this.
But Rabbi,
mhm.
isn't there a secondary audience here, and that's the Israelites? Because we're told just a chapter and a half before that the people weren't really listening to Moses. So certainly Moses can only govern with the consent of the governor.
Right, he's
What's
only going to be able to get the people to leave if they're willing to follow.
Right. So think about how this is going to be playing it among his own people.
Absolutely, and unfortunately,
Moses and
we've
Aaron
been in
come back.
yeah, and unfortunately, we've been in Egypt so long that I'm sure that this kind of stagecraft would have been impressive to the Israelites. As I mentioned later on in our history, it's very clear. Certainly by the end of our time in the wilderness of Sinai, and definitely by the time we reach larger additional writings like the Mishnah and the Talmud, we know that miracles don't impress our people all that much at all. I mean, they impress us, yes, but what we want is justice. What we want are laws. What we want is a society, not just miracle workers. Miracle workers are great to have around, but they don't pay the bills. They don't get the job done of Torah. So, but at this time in Egypt, I'm sure the people were much more like their Egyptian neighbors and were probably impressed by these sorts of tricks. And then Shemot Rabbah gives one more beautiful burn. The fool releases all his words. Sorry, we're based off Proverbs, right? A fool vents, a wise man calms it down. The fool releases all his words at once when he comes to quarrel with his friend, and the wise man at the end comes to remove it, right? So you have all of the staves being thrown down, right, as their basically mass display of their power. And then what happens? Very calmly, Aaron just sweeps it up. Right? They put down everything they had. They emptied their supply of rebuttal in this case, and then Aaron just removes it from the scene, being there to simply calmly wait for the person to finish venting and pouring out their stupidity, and then very slowly, deliberately taking apart each part until you've got it all cleaned up. That's the proper response. All right. But we're still left with Pharaoh seemingly being unmoved, not willing to back down despite what's just happened, which, as we've gone over, was probably even more impressive than one snake eating another snake. So the Midrash, this time from Tanhuma, summarizing, says the following. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent, as we've seen now. Pharaoh said, is this the full power of your God? Why, my magicians travel throughout the world performing such feats. Our sages of blessed memory said, he actually performed a great miracle with that rod. When one serpent is able to swallow other serpents, that is not unusual. But this serpent turned itself back into a rod again. if a man had bundles out of the rods that were cast to the ground to become serpents, there would have been more than 10 bundles. So this is based off the idea from the Midrash that there were like hundreds of magicians all doing their trick. This wasn't one versus one. This was a mass of their sorcerers against Aaron and Moses. So it swallowed hundreds of these other rods. Yet Aaron's rod swallowed them all, and it became no larger than it was previously. Right? Think about that for a moment. We've got now the change in our visualization of snake versus snake to being rod versus rod, but in the absorbing and the swallowing, it's not getting any bigger. It doesn't say that Aaron walks out carrying a tree from all of the rods that had been absorbed. And even if it had been a snake swallowing the other snakes, it doesn't say the snake was too fat. Right? Normally when animals eat other animals, they stop when they're full, but this one doesn't seem to have had that problem. So that is emphasizing a different aspect of this miracle. When Pharaoh beheld that, he was amazed and exclaimed, surely if he could command the rod, surely if he should command the rod to swallow Pharaoh and his throne, it could swallow them. Right? He thought that there wasn't a threat. And again, this is more metaphorical than just literal. This isn't just trying to say that the snake could have opened its mouth and swallowed Pharaoh and the throne. It is saying specifically, it is clear from the miracles that are being performed right in front of me that should the command be given, I and my kingdom could be destroyed. I am facing down a power greater than me. I am facing down a death greater than me. So what is his response? When Moses withdrew from Pharaoh's presence, the wicked one said, if this son of Amram comes near me again, I will slay him, I will hang him, I will burn him. That is why when when Moses returned, Pharaoh became like a rod, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had spoken. So the stiffening of Pharaoh was precisely because of his panic, that he was concerned that his kingdom was in jeopardy. Had it just been a matter of your magic versus my magic, he might have applauded politely, thrown them a couple of gold coins and said, all right, get out of here. But when he realized that what he was witnessing was a miracle that showed that God was willing to liberate his people and had the power to do it, he recognized that something more was at stake. And that is why he is stiffening himself against them, because he's recognizing that he has to stand against them, or else he and his despotic power and the power of the throne will be destroyed. And I just love the imagery of him becoming like the rod, which of course we as the omniscient reader know, that just makes you more vulnerable to being swallowed, right? Stiffening yourself, thinking you're going to kill Moses, thinking you're going to use violence to get your way out of this, the way despots have done throughout history, is just making you more likely to go down. If you had capitulated at this point, if you had allowed the Israelites to leave, everything could have worked out just fine for you and your nation. But instead, you have actually turned yourself into something more vulnerable rather than less. And all of your threats and blusters about murder and slaying and hanging are going to come back to bite you, pardon the pun, when we reach all the destruction that the plagues will wreak upon the nation of Egypt. Questions or comments? All right, then let's see how our commentators try to then reconcile his stubbornness through all of this, right? Because how could a person not be moved? How could a person not have their opinion convinced or changed after having witnessed such a spectacle? Pharaoh's heart remained obstinate, another way of saying hardened. Seeing that his sorcerers had been able to duplicate Aaron's feat, he concluded that Aaron was another sorcerer. Or Rashbam, in his own words, says, he claimed that Aaron had also merely performed a better kind of sorcery. When you are used to living in this Egyptian world, which valued this magic and performance, this theater that produced miracles that were not miracles, but did them on command in order to justify one's own rule. When you built your entire empire basically on lies and power and violence, then when you see someone else come and challenge you, and they do things that are similar to what you do, you can't recognize the true truth. You can't recognize that this time is different. When you are just around a bunch of people who will do your command, you think that the other person who shows up also has people who will do your command. And if you think that your people do it by just magic or whatever, it's just to fool the peasants, you think this guy is just better at it than my people. But that doesn't give him any validity. When you've decided to live according to lies and mistruth, you believe everything is a lie, even when it is true. And this is what is blinding Pharaoh, says Fiskuni and Rashbam, to the truth that he is now supposed to be recognizing. He's interpreting the actions of Moses and Aaron as though they were his own behavior. And when a person who lives like Pharaoh interprets the actions of others as though they were his own, he will miss the truth 10 times out of 10. Questions or comments? Wow, everybody is stunned into silence. But I agree that we often focus on the more destructive plagues. We often focus later on with the challenge of Pharaoh hardening his heart. Like I said, you can check the back catalog of YouTube videos where we have discussed that in more detail. But the episode here with the snake is his first and best opportunity to truly recognize that something miraculous is happening. It's not just a person asking, although that should have been enough to jog his conscience. But it is somebody producing a miracle that his folks can't produce. But in his mind, just because his folks can't do the same magic doesn't mean that what's happening isn't magic. Instead, it's just better magic. Maybe I should get Aaron on the payroll too. It's clearly you're very talented and you'll go far in your wonderful skills. But I don't actually need to recognize the truth behind what you are doing. It's just more of what I would do on stage. So thank you very much. Get out of here.
Rabbi, there's part of this is the whole doing of justice by God, and looking at this in context with the rest of the miracles, the plagues. It's kind of like, this is your warning. This is the warning shot before things start to escalate. And in that, perhaps there's a message for us, a lesson for us, that when we do justice, you don't go from 0 to 100 right away. You push. You first, fire a warning shot before you start taking further action that endangers human health or human life.
Indeed, and in fact, that's also part of the I think the teaching from Proverbs that the Midrash and Shemot Rabbah is giving us, that the fool just pushes everything out, but the wise person calms it down. Bit by bit. Sometimes you have to take it down and take it down a notch. And we can recognize that God could have begun with the slaying of the firstborn, but God didn't. God began with a much gentler. He began with just a request, and then he began with a sign, and then he continued with plagues, and each was meant to escalate the pressure on Pharaoh to recognize the truth. However, what's really sad by this being the first part of the scenario is that we can see that Pharaoh has surrounded himself with lies so much that he can't imagine what truth actually is when it shows up in front of him. And that's going to be his blind spot, even once his magicians tell him, this is, more than we can do. Even when they truly admit that they have no way to match what is happening, Pharaoh continues to be obstinate in his objection to what Moses and Aaron are asking for. And that's the danger that always happens whenever we are too complacent and too willing to swallow convenient lies that make us feel better or make us feel like we have more power or make us feel stronger, or whatever reason we have for wanting to believe what an objective an objective investigation would show is false, that at some point we may lose the ability to distinguish between what is true and what is false, even if it's a snake that's coming to bite us. All right, so slightly shorter discussion today, but thank you all for coming. And reminder, we have Mishnah tonight for those that would like to continue to study about Yevamot, Levirate marriage. And of course, Pathway to Judaism will be up tomorrow at 6. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy.
Thank you, Rabbi.